Imagine you're an explorer. The year is 1400 AD. You're traveling through the dense forests of what will one day be called Illinois. You push through the undergrowth and suddenly you stop. Because in front of you, rising from the earth, like something out of a dream, is a pyramid. Not in Egypt. Not in Mexico. Here, a massive earthen mountain, hand-built by human hands, towering 10 stories into the sky. Around it, the ruins of a city stretch out for miles. Overgrown plazas, collapsed wooden structures reclaimed by nature. Silent, completely, utterly silent. Who built this? Where did they go? And why did they leave? The answers, it turns out, are far stranger and far more unsettling than anyone expected. Most people, when they think of ancient civilizations, think of Rome, or Egypt, or the Aztecs. But long before any European set foot on North American soil, there was a city here that rivaled them all. A city with a population that may have exceeded 20,000 people at its height, larger than London at the same time. A city with massive public architecture, sophisticated trade networks stretching across an entire continent, and a political system complex enough to organize tens of thousands of lives. Its name was Cahokia, and then, in what historians still struggle to fully explain, it vanished. Not overnight, but fast enough that by the time European explorers arrived centuries later, no one could even tell them who had built it. Today, we're going to solve, or at least try to solve, one of the greatest mysteries in American history. Because the story of Cahokia isn't just about the past. It's a story about what happens to great civilizations when things start to go wrong, and whether we're paying attention closely enough to notice. To understand Cahokia, you have to go back, way back. For thousands of years, the Mississippi River Valley was home to countless small communities of indigenous people, hunter-gatherers mostly, moving with the seasons, living in small, scattered groups. But around 600 to 800 AD, something began to shift. The people of this region, archaeologists call them the woodland peoples, started settling down. Agriculture was becoming more reliable. Maize, or corn, had been spreading north from Mesoamerica for generations, and slowly, these communities learned to cultivate it effectively in the rich floodplains of the Mississippi. More food meant more people. More people meant more organization. More organization meant something new was possible, something that had never existed in this part of the world before. A city. The location chosen was remarkable, a broad, flat floodplain at the confluence of the Mississippi, Missouri, and Illinois rivers. Rich soil, access to water, strategic position for trade. It was, in short, the perfect place to build something that could last forever. And for a while, it did. Around 1050 AD, something extraordinary happened. Archaeologists call it the Cahokia Big Bang, and the name fits in what appears to have been an astonishingly short period, perhaps just a generation or two. Cahokia transformed from a modest settlement into a massive, planned urban center. The scale of this transformation is hard to overstate. In a matter of decades, the population exploded. New people flooded in from across the region. The landscape itself was redesigned. Forests cleared, wetlands drained, the earth sculpted into something entirely new. At the center of it all, Monks Mound. This was no ordinary hill. Monks Mound is a hand-built earthen pyramid covering 14 acres at its base, larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza in terms of footprint. It rises in 4 terraces to a height of 100 feet, and it was constructed entirely without metal tools, without the wheel, and without draft animals, just human hands, human backs, human will. At the top, archaeologists believe, stood a massive wooden structure, a temple, perhaps, or the residence of Cahokia's ruler, someone who looked down over a city of thousands from a height that must have felt, in that era, almost divine. But who was that ruler, and what kind of society had they built? At its height, roughly between 1050 and 1150 AD, Cahokia was extraordinary by any standard. The city was carefully planned. At its core was a massive central plaza, stretching nearly 50 acres, kept deliberately flat and open, a ceremonial space where thousands could gather. Around it, over 100 earthen mounds of various sizes defined the city's neighborhoods and ritual spaces. And it wasn't just one mound. It wasn't just Monks Mound. There were platform mounds, where elite buildings stood elevated above the city. Conical mounds, likely used as burial sites for important individuals. Ridgetop mounds whose purpose still puzzles researchers today. The city had a palisade, a massive wooden wall encircling the central precinct, rebuilt multiple times, suggesting both the resources to construct it and the reasons to need it. Beyond the walls, the city spread for miles. Suburbs, in essence, neighborhoods of thatched wooden houses, workshops, storage buildings. Archaeologists estimate that at peak, the greater Cahokia area was home to somewhere between 10,000 and 20,000 people, possibly more. That's a metropolis, and the trade networks feeding it were just as impressive. Copper from the Great Lakes, shells from the Gulf of Mexico, chert from distant quarries, mica from the Appalachians. Cahokia sat at the center of a continental trade web, drawing goods and people from across what is now the entire United States. It was cosmopolitan. It was powerful. It was, by any reasonable definition, a civilization. But here's what makes Cahokia truly fascinating and truly haunting: its religion. Cahokia's belief system was organized around cosmic themes: the sky, the earth, water, the underworld. The city itself may have been designed as a cosmological map, its mounds and plazas aligned with astronomical events. Researchers discovered a massive circle of wooden posts, dubbed Woodhenge by archaeologists, that appears to have tracked the movements of the sun throughout the year. The spring and fall equinoxes, the summer and winter solstices, all visible, all tracked, from this central location in the city. These weren't primitive people guessing at the universe. These were careful observers, building a civilization literally aligned with the cosmos. So who ran all of this? The evidence suggests Cahokia was ruled by a powerful, possibly semi-divine chieftain, someone whose authority was total political, military, and religious all at once. We know this in part because of one of the most striking archaeological discoveries ever made in North America: Mound 72. This burial mound, excavated in the 1960s, contained the remains of a young man, likely in his mid-20s, lying in a bed of more than 20,000 shell beads arranged in the shape of a falcon. Around him were the buried remains of over 250 other individuals, many of them young women who may have been sacrificed to accompany him into death. Nearby, bundled remains of other high-status individuals, caches of arrows, offerings of exotic goods from across the continent. This was not a democratic society. The man in Mound 72, whoever he was, commanded the kind of reverence that required mass human sacrifice at his death. He was, in all likelihood, considered something more than human by his people: a god king, a cosmic ruler, the living embodiment of whatever power Cahokia believed organized the universe. And this level of power, this level of hierarchy, tells us something important. Because extreme hierarchy creates extreme inequality, and extreme inequality creates resentment. That's worth remembering. By the mid-1100s, Cahokia had reached its peak, and then, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, things began to go wrong. The first problem was one Cahokia's own success had created. A city of tens of thousands of people needs to eat, and feeding that many people in the pre-industrial world required massive agricultural output. The rich floodplains around Cahokia were productive, but they weren't infinite. As the population grew, more land was cleared, more forests were felled for agriculture and construction. Deforestation on a massive scale. And when you remove forests from a floodplain, you change how water moves through the landscape. Flooding becomes more unpredictable. Soil erodes. Agricultural yields eventually begin to fall. The city was slowly eating itself. At the same time, climate was becoming an issue. The medieval warm period, a climatic anomaly that brought warmer, wetter conditions to much of North America, had been a blessing for Cahokia's rise. Longer growing seasons, more reliable rainfall, ideal conditions for maize agriculture. But climates don't stay constant. Around 1150 to 1200 AD, the weather began to shift. Droughts became more frequent. Floods, paradoxically, because of the deforestation, also became more severe. A series of major flood events, evidenced in the archaeological record, would have been devastating for a city built in a floodplain. Food insecurity leads to social stress. Social stress leads to conflict. And there's evidence of plenty of conflict. The palisade walls around Cahokia's central district weren't decorative. They were defensive fortifications, rebuilt and reinforced multiple times. Skeletal remains from this period show evidence of violent trauma consistent with warfare. Something was threatening Cahokia from the outside, or tearing it apart from the inside. Perhaps both. Here's what we know. By the 1200s, Cahokia was a city in decline, but it wasn't going quietly. Archaeological evidence shows that the defensive palisade was rebuilt at least 4 times, a massive investment of labor and resources that suggests the city felt under persistent threat. Watchtowers were added, the walls were reinforced. Who were they afraid of? The honest answer is, we're not entirely sure. Some theories suggest conflict with rival chiefdoms, other Mississippian societies that had grown in Cahokia's shadow and may have been challenging its dominance. As Cahokia's ability to control its trade networks weakened, rivals would have smelled blood. Other evidence points to internal conflict, class warfare, perhaps. The extreme hierarchy of Cahokian society, with a god-king at the top and masses of commoners at the bottom, was only sustainable as long as the system was delivering prosperity. When food became scarce and floods began destroying harvests, the social contract would have frayed. Why should commoners continue to labor on massive building projects, hauling earth, constructing walls, maintaining the city when they were going hungry? There's also a more subtle theory that cuts to the heart of Cahokia's belief system. In many societies organized around divine kingship, the ruler's power is connected to cosmic order. The king's job isn't just to govern, it's to maintain the proper functioning of the universe. When things go wrong, when floods come, when harvests fail, when enemies threaten, it raises an uncomfortable question. Has the king lost his divine mandate? In a society that genuinely believed in this cosmology, that question would have been explosive. It might not have led to open revolution immediately, but it would have eroded the unquestioning loyalty that massive public works required. People might have started to leave, and once people start to leave a city, once the critical mass begins to thin, the collapse can become self-reinforcing. The abandonment of Cahokia wasn't sudden. It was a slow bleed. Between roughly 1200 and 1350 AD, the population of Cahokia declined steadily. Construction of new mounds slowed, then stopped. Trade networks contracted. The elite compounds near Monks Mound appear to have been abandoned first, and then, gradually, the surrounding city followed. Where did the people go? This is one of archaeology's great open questions. Some researchers believe they dispersed into smaller, more sustainable communities throughout the region. Some may have migrated north, south, or west, carrying elements of Mississippian culture with them. Smaller Mississippian chiefdoms continued to exist across the American Southeast for centuries after Cahokia's fall, some of them surviving all the way to European contact. The culture didn't die, it dispersed, but Cahokia itself, the great city, the center of the world as its people knew it, was left behind. By 1400 AD, the site appears to have been essentially empty. No major population. The wooden structures had collapsed or been dismantled. The mounds remained, they were too large to disappear, but the city that had given them meaning was gone, and the reasons are still debated. Was it climate change? Almost certainly a factor. Resource depletion definitely contributed. Political instability and social collapse. The evidence suggests yes. External warfare, possibly disease. Some researchers have raised the possibility that epidemic illness, perhaps spreading through Cahokia's extensive trade networks, may have contributed to population decline. The most likely answer is the most uncomfortable one. All of the above. Cahokia didn't fall to a single enemy or a single disaster. It was death by 1,000 cuts, a complex system under pressure from too many directions at once, until the center could no longer hold. Sound familiar? Today, Cahokia Mounds State Historic Site sits just outside St. Louis, Missouri. Monks Mound still rises 10 stories into the Illinois sky. Visitors can climb its terraces and look out over a landscape that, 1,000 years ago, was one of the most densely populated places in the Western Hemisphere. Most people drive past it on the highway without knowing it's there. That, perhaps, is the greatest mystery of all. Not why Cahokia fell, but why we forgot it. Cahokia challenges some of our deepest assumptions about North American history. It forces us to reckon with the fact that the land Europeans arrived on was not an empty wilderness. It was a landscape shaped by thousands of years of indigenous civilization, agriculture, and urban development. The people who built Cahokia were not primitive. They were not simple. They were engineers who moved millions of cubic feet of earth by hand, astronomers who tracked celestial movements with precision, traders who maintained continent-spanning networks without writing or wheels, political organizers who governed tens of thousands of people, and then they made the same mistakes that great civilizations throughout history have made. They grew too fast. They extracted too much. Their leaders became too detached from the needs of ordinary people. Their belief systems could not bend fast enough when reality changed, and so, like so many others before and after, they fell. But they didn't disappear entirely. Their descendants are still here. The Osage, the Omaha, the Quapaw, and many other nations of the American Midwest trace cultural and possibly genetic connections to the Mississippian world that Cahokia built. The story didn't end in 1400 AD, it just changed form. And maybe that's the most important lesson Cahokia has to offer. Civilizations don't last forever, but the people inside them are resilient. When the center collapses, they adapt, they scatter, they carry their knowledge and their stories into new places and new forms. Cahokia is gone, but something of it remains in the earth of the mounds, in the DNA of its descendants, and in the slowly growing recognition that America's history did not begin when Europeans arrived. It began here, on a floodplain by a great river, with the sound of 10,000 people building something that would outlast them all. If this story surprised you, if you had no idea that a city this large, this sophisticated, this remarkable existed in pre-Columbian North America, you're not alone. Most people don't. And that's exactly why we make these documentaries. If you want to see more deep dives into forgotten civilizations, lost cities, and the untold stories of history, hit subscribe and join us. We release new documentaries every week, and we're just getting started. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What aspect of Cahokia surprised you most? The size, the architecture, the human sacrifice, the fact that we've largely forgotten it? Drop your thoughts below. And if there's a lost civilization, historical mystery, or forgotten chapter of history you want us to explore next, tell us. The best suggestions genuinely shape what we make. We'll see you in the next one.